You know, when you took a drive through Pigeon Forge or Sevier County today, you may have heard back in the distance a steam locomotive whistle. But did you know that back in the early 1900s there was a difference? Just like neighboring Blount County with the Little River Railroad and Lumber Company and Southern, and in Cobb County with the Southern Railway running through Newport, Sevier County had its own railroad way back in the 1900s. That ran from Knoxville all the way down to Sevierville. In the 1940s, it helped build Douglas Dam with a spur line. And it was many locomotives like the one behind me, 107, that helped pull it. I'm your host, Scott, and this is our home, Tennessee. And today we're going to be looking at the Knoxville and Sevierville Eastern Railroad, or as it was called in its later years, the Smoky Mountains, or the old slow and easy. So let's take a trip back in time, back into the early 1900s on the slow and easy.
Look out across the water, I smell the salt and feel the breeze, but in my heart I hear the calling of my old home, Tennessee. We don't know where these rivers flow, or why the wind chooses when and where to blow. The sun is gonna rise each and every time, but I've still got Tennessee on my mind. From Leaper's Fork to Watertown, and maybe Johnson City or Memphis bound. No matter where I go, no matter what I see, I still hear the calling of Tennessee. And who we don't know where these rivers flow, or why the wind chooses when and where to blow. The sun is gonna rise each and every time, and I've still got Tennessee on my mind.
You know, the Smoky Mountain Railroad ran from Knoxville, Tennessee, via Shook's Gap, Seymour, and Boyd's Creek to the Sevierville area, which is about the distance of about 30 miles or so. It was extended even further into what is close to present-day Pigeon Forge. You know, construction began on the Smoky Mountain Railroad back in June of 1908 under the leadership of William J. Oliver of Knoxville, Tennessee. The railroad was reaching Sevierville in January of 1910, and in 1917 the Pigeon River Bridge in Sevierville was bridged, which made the rails extend all the way down present-day Bruce Street to its final ending point. That final segment was to be used for the vast lumber in the region, but it never reached its full potential. The line was even extended close to McCookville, which is near present-day Pigeon Forge. Now, the Smoky Mountain Railroad is a unique railroad because this small short line operated under 5 different names of 5 different time periods of the railroad's history. And we're going to take a look at each segment of the railroad and how each different one had its own mark. So, let's begin. The 5 different time periods of the Smoky Mountain Railroad was as follows. First, you had the Knoxville, Sevierville, and Eastern Railway Company, which operated from 1907 to 1921. And then you had the Knoxville and Carolina Railway Company, which ran from 21 until about 1936. And then you had the Tennessee and North Carolina Railroad Company, which ran from 1927 to 38. And when it was the Tennessee and North Carolina Railroad, it ran as the Knoxville division of the T&NC. And then you had the Smoky Mountain Railway Company that ran from 1938 to 1957. And that was the main bulk part of the Smoky Mountain Railroad during its main time frame. In 1957, it was turned over to the Sevier Countyans to operate, and it ran as this plain old Smoky Mountain Railroad, slow and easy, from 1957 to about the time that the ICC granted the line abandonment in the 1960s. Like most short line railroads in the United States, things didn't always go planned or run as smooth as they hoped, and the Smoky Mountain Railroad was no exception. During its history, Smoky Mountain ran into various problems. The builder, William J. Oliver, made his money off of construction, but had no interest in operating the railroad, so he sold it to another group that included L.C. Gunther and W.B. Townsend. W.B. Townsend, already prosperous from his Little River Railroad and Lumber Company in Townsend, Tennessee, and Elkmont and Tremont. They had grand plans for the railroad and big ideas, but never carried them out, and it fell through. They ended up selling it to a third company, which after a few years they failed, and in 1937 it was sold to the Midwestern Steel Company based out of West Virginia. Now, Midwestern Steel Company was very interested in scrap steel, and seeing how the line was not making a lot of money at the time, Midwestern Steel tried to push and force abandonment of the line. Abandon the line, you can get the scrap steel and they can make money. And it looked very bleak for Smoky Mountain Railroad. It looked very bleak at the time. But in 1941, with the onset of World War II and the New Deal project going on, the Tennessee Valley Authority was looking to build a dam at Douglas Lake. And it does so happens the most convenient way to get the supplies to the lake for construction was the Smoky Mountain Railroad. So a branch line was built off of Boyd's Creek, where the piers, concrete piers, are still visible today from that branch. And at that time, it forced Midwestern Steel to postpone the abandonment, because for the first time in the entire history of Smoky Mountain Railroad, the line was making money, making all this money from the TVA and from supplies and workers. But unfortunately, all good things can't keep going on, and when the project was built, things started to dwindle and go back to normal. And just as they went back to normal and low profit, Midwestern Steel decided to try to push abandonment again. They started cutting off supplies, they quit doing road repairs on the roadbed and the track, and it got so bad to the point things looked doomed for the little Smoky Mountain line. But in 1957, it was back up and sold to a bunch of Sevier Countyans that included A.J. King, J.B. Waters, Mr. Ashley, and a few others. And they decided to operate the line, and they tried to put some money into it and operate it, only for a short amount of time. But they did try to save, Sevier County did try to save its own little railroad. Sevierville and Eastern Railroad Company built the line in 4 phases. The first phase was from 1908 to 1910, and it went from Vestral to 1 mile west of Sevierville, and that was built by the KS&E. Now, from 1910 to 1911, the KSE built the line from 1 mile west of Sevierville to the present Sevierville, the ending Sevierville Depot. From 1911, the Pigeon River Railroad built a line from the Sevierville Depot on down to McCookville, or present-day Pigeon Forge. Now, the Smoky Mountain Railroad started in Knoxville, and it came down from Knoxville on the Southern Railway's Knoxville and Augusta branch, and with a few windy turns and connections, started on its way towards Sevierville. Now, as we went along this trip towards Sevierville, as you can see on my map, the line went through Seymour, and if you follow the map, it intertwines Chapman Highway, which is the current highway going from Sevierville to Knoxville, quite often. Now, when it went into Seymour, it kind of went up to Boyd's Creek, where the spur line was built at Ewing for Douglas Dam in the 1940s. From Boyd's Creek, it crossed over and it started to slowly come down near the old present Sevierville Fairgrounds, and then it intertwined and went across the Pigeon River, and then down Bruce Street toward the ending point, which was the present-day depot. Now, some of the places along the line are kind of still there, like Bruce Street. When you're going down Bruce Street, you can still see the impression of the railroad tracks. The city of Sevierville put that impression back in so everybody can know the history of Smoky Mountain. There's still some viewpoints. But that's the main look at the route of the old Smoky Mountain Railroad from Knoxville and Vestral to Sook's Gap to Boyd's Creek and Seymour, all the way down to Sevierville. Up next, we're going to take a look at some of the motive power of the Smoky Mountain Railroad. The Smoky Mountain Railroad was a steam locomotive fancier's dream, holding a roster of locomotives, some of which may have never been seen anywhere else in the world. Although the Smoky Mountain Railroad did depend heavily on the Knoxville Southern steam shops for any maintenance and parts needed. The steam era on the Smoky Mountain Railroad ran until about the 1950s, when it became a diesel line. And even during its short time period as a diesel line, it still had a very unique locomotive. A majority of the Smoky Mountain Railroads that come to mind at the start were small locomotives. They owned a few 260s and 440 American, a couple of 10-reelers. It wasn't until the line transitioned over to Smoky Mountain's ownership that it started to see an influx of business and needed more powerful locomotives. One of the first locomotives that was ordered by Smoky Mountain was number 102. Now, there's not a lot of information on 102 other than it's a 262, and it got scrapped in about 1943. About the same time that 102 got scrapped, Smoky Mountain purchased another famous locomotive from the area, Little River Railroad and Lumber Company number 110. Now, number 110 has the honors of being the world's smallest Pacific-type locomotive, built powerful enough to haul the heavy timber out of the Smoky Mountains, but also small enough to navigate the tight curves and turns of the line. It was bought as a power increase over the 102. About the same time, with a big pickup of traffic, the Smoky Mountain Railroad needed some other big power. So they went out and purchased number 107 from the Southern Railway. Now, 107 also had an interesting career, as it started out as part of the East Tennessee, Virginia Railroad line as number 419, and it came to Southern, and Southern numbered it 107, and then they sold it to Smoky Mountain. Now, 107 has quite a few interesting honors. It is still visible today on 441 Parkway in Pigeon Forge at the Dollywood Information Center on display. But it's also known as one of the first locomotives back in town of Sevierville after the washout in January of 1947. For a while, there was a big washout, and once the line got reopened, 107 had the honors of pulling the first mixed train back from Knoxville. Also, they had number 206, which was a 260, and they had another one that was loaned to them by the Tennessee Valley Authority. That was a little switcher locomotive, but it only could stay up toward the dam operating the branch line. It never saw time on the main line like 107, 20. 154 is a 280 colonnadation, much like 107, almost identical. And it was ran by Southern and was mainly their yard goat. But one time in the 1950s, when Smoky Mountain did not have no more steam locomotives operable because of maintenance and low budget, and they did not have the funds to maintenance these steam locomotives, they had to reach out and rent number 154 from Southern. 154 is now running presently on the Three River Rambler in Knoxville, Tennessee. Number 110, former Smoky Mountain Little River Railroad 110, is running up in Michigan on the Little River Railroad Michigan line. There's always been an interesting stable of Smoky Mountain Railroads locomotives, and at one point they also owned a little diesel 44-ton diesel that is currently being restored to operation. So there's still some Smoky Mountain Railroad locomotives out there that's starting to see some service. 206 is currently at the Chattanooga Choo Choo being used at the motel. You know, operations on the Smoky Mountain Railroad often used to be unusual, sometimes amazing. See, the Smoky Mountain Railroad was visioned as a property for a main line like Southern Railroad, or a bridge through the Great Smoky Mountains and to tie into the East Coast lines. It was never imagined to be an operational short line for a profit. And because of that, they lacked certain amenities that could ease day-to-day operations, such as for the start of the railroad, there was no turntable at either end of the line in Sevierville or Knoxville. So when the railroad first started out, their operation was difficult. They had to pull the train into Sevierville, uncouple, run around the train and couple back up to the last car and go all the way back to Knoxville in reverse. And then when you get to Knoxville, you'd have at Crusher Y, they would have to go through the Y and perform a couple of flying switches to end up back in the right direction at the station in Knoxville. And the Smoky Mountain Railroad crew got it down so much to where their flying switches were done flawlessly with plenty of practice. Now, later on, Sevierville had a Armstrong turntable where the engine crew, the fireman or conductor or somebody would have to get out and turn the turntable for the locomotive to turn, and then they would just pull it back, go back in the same direction. Made life easier. And it got to the point, practices got so difficult on the Smoky Mountain Railroad that with the lack of profit and lack of budget, the conditions on the railroad started to deteriorate, such to a point where some of their practices were odd. Like Boyd's Creek Trestle that crossed Boyd's Creek had gotten to the point where it had gotten so beyond repair that the engine crew started valuing their lives more than they did the equipment. And what they would do is when the train would stop, firemen would get out, walk across the trestle, engineer would open the throttle just a little, and everybody would empty, and the train would go across the trestle. Now, by the time the train got to the other side of the trestle, the fireman was there, and it was going at such a slow speed that the fireman could jump back on and would stop the train. Once the crew got back on the locomotive and the cars, it was full forward back to their destination, whether it be Knoxville or Sevierville. Something else that was interesting that they started doing late in the 1950s was you had constant derailments on the line due to bad condition, bad track condition. So what Smoky Mountain Railroad started doing was every time they would run a train, they would put a flat car behind the locomotive that they called the derail car. It had various tools, spikes, hammers, rails, ties, blocks, whatever's needed to fix a derailment. So as you can see, operations on the Smoky Mountain Railroad was kind of unique. It was East Tennessee and Sevier County's own little unique line. So as you can see from our trip today, looking back through Sevier County history, Sevierville had its own little railroad, and it was kind of the little gem of the Smoky Mountains, along with Dolly Parton, Dollywood, Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The old slow and easy Smoky Mountain Railroad is just a testament to days gone by. I'm your host, Scott, for Our Home Tennessee, and I hope you enjoyed your look back into history today. Tune in for the next episode, which will be about Elkmont. So everybody have a great night, and remember, this is our home.